Welcome to episode 341 of FBI Retired Case File Review with Jerry Williams. I'm a retired agent on a mission to show you who the FBI is and what the FBI does through my books, my blog, and my podcast case reviews with former colleagues. Today, we get to speak to retired agent Geoffrey Kelly, who served in the FBI for 28 years. In this episode, he reviews his investigation of Robert Mardirosian for possession of stolen art and the recovery, more than 30 years after the crime occurred, of a Cezanne still life painting valued at over $29 million and other artwork stolen during the largest residential burglary in U.S. history. Mardirosian was convicted at trial. Geoff also talks about the FBI's elite art crime team, which was founded in 2004. He was one of the original members of the team. For the majority of his career, Geoff Kelly was assigned to a violent crime squad in the Boston Division. Being on the art crime team was a collateral duty. Throughout his career, Geoff managed numerous high-profile investigations utilizing sophisticated techniques, veteran interviewing skills, and good old-fashioned detective work. He has recovered more than $100 million in stolen artwork and cultural property, items as diverse as rare books, fine art, Native American artifacts, looted treasures, and even Tom Brady's stolen Super Bowl jerseys. Geoff is an internationally recognized expert in the field of fine art and antiquities, and has traveled the world, training domestic and international agencies and institutions on proven methods and best practices to deter art and cultural property theft. He has a proven track record of solving difficult cases, making him one of the most respected investigators in the field. His most challenging investigation was of the Gardner Museum robbery, for which he was able to identify the perpetrators. However, the stolen artwork has yet to be recovered. Geoff also has extensive experience investigating violent crimes, including cold case homicides, bank robberies, and kidnappings. He was the case agent on the real-life notorious Charlestown armored car robbery crew, fictionalized in the Ben Affleck movie The Town. After retiring, Geoff and his colleagues formed Argus Cultural Property Consultants, a consulting firm dedicated to preserving and protecting art and cultural property. Geoff also serves as an instructor at Harvard's Extension School, teaching a graduate-level course on art crime and investigations. Now, Geoff has promised me he'll come back on FBI Retired Case File Review to review the Gardner Museum robbery. And I'd also like to hear about his investigation of the Charlestown armored car robbery crew. So many cases, so little time. This is the last episode of 2024. We'll meet again on New Year's Day to kick off 2025 with a special encore episode and a few sincere remarks from me about the future of the FBI. I want to welcome new listeners. In your podcast app's description of this episode, you'll find a link to join my reader team, where I talk about crime fiction, and you can learn about the FBI in books, TV, and movies. There are also links for you to buy me a cup of coffee and discover my nonfiction book, FBI Myths and Misconceptions, a manual for armchair detectives, and my crime novels, Pay to Play and Greedy Givers, all available as ebooks and paperbacks wherever books are sold, and audiobooks on Audible and Spotify. By the way, they make excellent holiday gifts. Thank you for your support. Happy holidays. Now here's the show. I want to welcome my guest, retired agent Geoff Kelly. Hey, Geoff, how are you?
I'm good, Jerry. How are you?
I'm doing great. Once a month, I review an FBI-focused TV show or a movie for teachable moments about FBI programs, policies, and procedures. And I reviewed National Treasure. I was talking a little bit about the art crime team, and I realized that although I had reviewed some cases that involved rare documents or thefts of art, I had never interviewed anyone from the art crime team, so I'm really excited to have you on the show today.
I'm excited to be the first. I did not know that.
Nobody that was official, the people who had worked those violations, but I have been waiting for my good friend Bob Whitman to come on. He's got this great case that he worked on when we were in the Philadelphia office involving a custodian that they thought had been stealing the stuff from this particular museum, but he had actually been paid to bring that stuff to someone else. It was just a really fascinating case. I'm going to still hope that he'll come on one day to talk about it, but I am so lucky I was introduced to you and have you on because you've had some great cases too. And I understand that you were a part of the art crime team from the very beginning.
That's true. Yeah, I'm one of the original members. The team was started in 2004. It started in response to the looting of the Iraqi National Museum in Baghdad after the Iraq War started. It was like over a 48-hour period. Just thousands of objects were looted and destroyed. And the government at the time said, wow, FBI, send in the art crime team. And we were like, well, we don't have one. So that was kind of the genesis. That's the reason why we started the team back in '04.
Yeah, I went with Bob several times to the University of Pennsylvania's museum where they have a nice selection of artifacts and antiquities from Iraq. And I just was able to have a chance to look at those and to help Bob talk about the work that the FBI was doing at the time because I was the office's media rep. There was a lot of great work and recoveries that were made at the time so that those things that had been looted and stolen could be returned.
It's an important mission. And when you think about artifacts being looted from Iraq or Iran or Syria, it's not appropriate to think of it as their artifacts. It's our artifacts, really. It's mankind. It's really the birthplace of civilization. And it's important for us as stewards of this cultural patrimony to make sure that it lasts for subsequent generations.
Absolutely. Those type of investigations that the art crime team was involved in were cases involving thefts. The one that you're going to talk about today was a theft that occurred 30 years before your investigation was able to identify the stolen artwork and to return it to the rightful owners.
Yeah, and that's not uncommon for art theft matters. And that's kind of a mindset that you have to adopt as an art theft investigator. Art and cultural property, when it's stolen, typically is recovered either shortly after the theft occurred or it's generational. Somebody's going through an attic, somebody's cleaning out their late father's belongings or a safe deposit box. And that's how a lot of times this cultural property and stolen artwork resurfaces. So you really have to have a lot of patience if you're working these types of investigations, because if it doesn't come back quickly, it's going to take a while.
So they're playing the long game.
Yeah, it's definitely the long game. This is a marathon. It's not a sprint.
I've been able to read up a little bit on this case, and I'm real excited for you to present it today. So, where do you want to start?
Well, we'll start at the beginning. That's usually a good place to start. When you're talking about historic art thefts, as an art crime team agent, we start way back. We don't start when the theft occurs. It's important for us to get the provenance for the piece, which is the history of the piece from when it was created by the artist to the present day. To put it in FBI terms, it's kind of like a chain of custody for that piece. You want to be able to trace it from the very beginning. One thing that always fascinates me about working these art theft cases is the backstory, is the story behind the theft. And so I think it would be appropriate to start way back and probably go back about 100 years just to give you a little bit of some contextual background for this piece that was stolen and the others.
Wow. So I thought we were going back 30 years, but we're going to go back 100 years.
No, Jerry, we're going way back. Harry and Ruth Backman were both pediatricians at NYU. They got married. Ruth was the heiress to the Swift and Company meatpacking fortune. They loved art, and they would take their family. They had 4 kids. They would take regular trips to Europe and collect artwork. And they were very interested in Impressionist and post-Impressionist pieces. And they amassed a really spectacular collection. One of the pieces that they collected, and it's important for our story today, is a piece called Pitcher and Fruit, which was by Paul Cezanne. The Backmans purchased it in 1955 in Munich. It's a beautiful piece, still life. It really influenced the Cubist movement in the art world, and Picasso called it one of the greatest pictures ever painted, just to give you an idea of what we're talking about, the scope of this work. So the Backwins had an agreement in the family that after they died, each child, and there were 4, would get to pick one piece that they wanted for their own collection. Harry died in 1973. And in 1976, Ruth let their son Michael choose his favorite piece. And he chose the Cezanne. He had good taste. He kept it, along with a number of other works from the collection, at his estate in Stockbridge, Massachusetts, which is way out in the Berkshires in Western Mass, almost to the New York border. Now we're going to, I don't know, we can say fast forward or maybe going back a little bit more, but we go back to Memorial Day weekend in 1978. Michael Backman and his wife Doris, they head to New York for the weekend. They come back on Monday night. They go into the house. There's no sign of any forced entry. Nothing's amiss. They go to bed. Next morning, Michael leaves and Doris goes into the dining room and she sees at that point that there's a whole bunch of empty wall space. And 7 pieces from the collection have been stolen. There's a Heimsoutine that's taken, a couple of Heimsoutines of La Mink, a Maurice Utrillo, a couple of Jansom pieces. Most of all, the Cezanne pitcher and fruit is gone. She can't get in touch with Michael, so she calls the local police chief, and they come out and take stock of what's happened. And what has happened is the largest residential burglary in U.S. history. These 7 pieces represent the highest monetary loss ever in a residential burglary.
And how much is that?
By today's standards, we'd be talking well over $100 million.
Wow.
Back then, it was a couple $1,000,000, but it's so hard to quantify it in terms of dollar value. It's more important to look at it from what these pieces represent.
These were what you would call museum quality pieces. Items like them are actually held in museums with a lot more security than a private home.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. It's one of the ironies about private collections, that oftentimes the caliber and the quality of the pieces that are in that collection really are museum worthy, but they have residential home security systems, if any. And as the police come and the FBI is called in as well, it becomes shockingly apparent that the security in the Backman residence was non-existent. They don't remember if the house was locked. No alarm system. And even if the house had been locked, it was well known in Stockbridge that the Backmans kept a spare key under a ceramic frog on the front steps. When you're talking about security systems, the ceramic frog is pretty low in terms of museum quality security.
Yeah.
But of course, there's this belief in law enforcement that the higher the dollar value of an item stolen, when you're talking about art and cultural property, the higher the caliber of the thieves. And that's not accurate. Everybody thinks because the works that were taken were of such high value and of such importance that this must have been pulled off by professionals. You think about Catherine Zeta-Jones doing the limbo under laser beams and rappelling out through a skylight. That's really not the truth about the art world. It's a lot less Thomas Crown affair and more like The Usual Suspects.
Would you say that in all likelihood, the person who took these didn't even know their value or what they were?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's one of the problems. It is one of the ironies in art theft is the more well-known and the more valuable the piece, the harder it is to move it. The art theft market in the US is estimated to be about $6 to $8 billion a year. It's actually worldwide. It is mostly comprised of lesser-known works. There's another case that I had, the Gardner Museum, which I'd love to talk to you at some other time when you have a few hours to spare. But these works were so valuable, so iconic, so well known that their value anywhere is zero because you can't move it. And it's the same thing with Pitcher and Fruit, the Cezanne piece that was taken from the Backman estate. It's too valuable to sell. Everybody knows what it is. So when you look at the $6 to $8 billion a year illicit art market worldwide, you're talking about pieces that are second, third, fourth tier works of art, especially now as the internet has become so intrinsically linked with the art market. You can't sell anything without somebody doing a Google search. At the time, unfortunately, Mr. Backman had minimal insurance on the policy. And of course, one of the big issues was this an insurance job? And it seemed pretty apparent it wasn't due to the lack of insurance that he had. Mr. Backman offered a $25,000 reward for the paintings. FBI opened a case and it really didn't go anywhere. What was done at the time, which will come into play later, is the stolen pieces were entered into the database for an institution called IFAR, which is the International Foundation for Art Research, which is in New York. Ironically, they just announced a few weeks ago that they're closing after 55 years, which is a shame because they were a wonderful resource for keeping track of stolen artwork throughout the world. And so those items were entered into IFAR back in 1978, and it's going to show again decades later. Kind of spoiler alert, we figured out who did it. And I say we, meaning the FBI, because I think I was in elementary school at the time. It was this guy named David Colvin. And he fit the profile of the art thief. When we look historically about art thefts that have occurred around the country and occurred around the world, they're more like the David Colvins than they are the Thomas Crowns. This guy was a small-time hustler. He once got arrested for shooting a dog. He was into dealing drugs and firearms. He was the typical art thief. Through the investigation that was done back in 1978, Colvin came up because he'd asked a friend of his 2 months before the theft occurred if he was interested in Backman's artwork. That kind of was a clue that put the investigators on his trail. Colvin, he was looking at federal firearms charges at the time in Boston. And a couple months after the heist, he went and visited his attorney, criminal defense attorney, a guy by the name of Robert Mardirosian in Watertown, Massachusetts, which is right outside of Boston. Very small, bucolic town in Mass that really was brought onto the world stage right after the Marathon bombing, because that's where the Tsarnaev brothers were captured and killed. So Colvin shows up at his defense attorney. He has a court appearance in Boston. He has this plastic garbage bag with him, and he opens it up and shows Mardirosian, his attorney, what's inside, and it is the 7 paintings that were stolen from the Backman estate. Colvin wants to take them down to Florida to see if he can move them down there, and Mardirosian talks him out of this. And I'll tell you in a little while, we'll get back to it as to how we found out about this conversation. But since Colvin's right outside of Boston, he lives out in Pittsfield, Mass, which is out in Western Mass. He asks his attorney, Mardirosian, if he can crash there for the night, and he lets him. Unfortunately for Colvin, he owed a $1,500 gambling debt to a guy named Arthur Lucky Sampson. This debt remained unpaid for well over a year. Finally, in February of 1979, Sampson and a friend of his, Brian Matchett, finally decided to settle that debt. And they went to Pittsfield, Mass. to go find Colvin and to collect that debt. Ends up there's a struggle. Colvin gets shot twice and he dies.
When we hear that an attorney's client has told him about some stolen artwork, you would hope that the attorney is going to encourage him to turn that in, even if it is to mitigate or get a reduction in the case that they have in front of them. But that didn't occur.
No, and of course, I mean, it's astounding when you look at this story about what happened. And we're talking about Mardirosian. He's an officer of the court. He's a member of the bar. He's a defense attorney. Certainly, if you want to take it to its basest level, at least try and leverage those stolen paintings for some type of consideration for his pending gun charges. But to tell him to just hold on to them is pretty incredible. Mr. Mardirosian was something. So Colvin ends up dying. He gets shot twice. He dies, and the paintings go missing for 2 decades. And this really gets back to what we were just talking about a few minutes ago. Art is recovered shortly after it occurred. Now, had Mr. Mardirosian told Colvin to go take these to the police, or he could help him and assist him in getting these paintings recovered, that would have fit the first part of art getting recovered, right? It would have been shortly after the theft occurred. But he didn't. And so what happens is decades pass. Nothing is heard about from these pieces until 1999. Lloyd's of London reaches out to a company in London called the Art Loss Register. Art Loss Register, if people haven't heard of it, if you're in the art world, it's like Kleenex or Xerox. It's very well known. And they basically have this massive database of stolen art and cultural property. And they're really basically like the gold standard for any auction house or gallery that wants to do their due diligence if they're going to sell a piece of artwork. And that's basically what happens now, right? All the major auction houses, they take their catalog and they send it to the Art Loss Register to have them run all the pieces through there to make sure that nothing has been reported stolen. Major galleries do the same thing. We talked about IFAR, the International Foundation of Art Research. They merged years ago, and the ALR, Art Loss Register, obtained their database of their stolen works, and included in that database were those 7 items that were taken from the Backman estate. So we jump forward to 1999, and Lloyd's of London reaches out to the ALR. They tell them that they have a client who wants to insure some artwork for shipment. The Art Loss Register, through Julian Radcliffe, who runs the Art Loss Register, Julian advises Lloyd's that it's stolen. And so Julian ends up getting a meeting with the person who is trying to arrange for this insurance for this artwork, a guy named Tony Westbrook. And Julian and Tony get together in London over dinner. And Julian is talking with this guy about this artwork and telling him that it's stolen. Westbrook doesn't know the identity of the guy who's hired him to insure these pieces. And obviously, Jerry, you know that. I'm sure your listeners do. We call them an unsub, unidentified subject. He doesn't know the ID of the unsub. And Westbrook tells Julian that he just gets phone calls from this guy. The guy seems to have an American accent, and the timing of the calls, when the calls come, would probably indicate this guy's on US time. So it's probably an American. Julian wants to make sure that anything that goes forward with this artwork is done ethically and legally, and he wants the police to get involved. And he tells this guy, Tony Westbrook, that he's going to make sure that the police are aware of what's going on because this is stolen artwork. But he wants to move forward with this to see if we can get a recovery. So Julian reaches out to Mr. Backman, who is the victim from back in 1978, and explains what's going on. And Mr. Backman retains the art loss register to assist them as they move forward to try and get these paintings back. You'll see this so many times when you're working art theft cases, that there's so many charlatans out there and con men and people that will pretend that they have artwork that they don't have to try and make some money off it. One of the key points, one of the things that we're always looking for when we're talking about art is proof of life, something to show that you have what you're claiming to have. And so Julian asks Westbrook for proof of life for these 7 pieces, and Westbrook gives him 7 photographs of the pieces, of the stolen pieces. Now, this is noteworthy in one big point, that Mr. Backman knew that the Utrillo, one of the stolen pieces, had never been photographed. That gets back to a big problem that we have when we work art theft investigations, is sometimes we don't even have a photograph of the object that was stolen. We just have a physical description. But in this case, we had 7 photographs for 7 stolen pieces. And since one of them had never been photographed before, gave a lot of credibility that Mr. Westbrook's unsub actually did have control of these paintings. So Julian is trying to negotiate the return of these paintings now through Westbrook from the unsub. The unsub makes it very clear. He wants $15 million. Considering Mr. Backman 20 years earlier was offering $25,000, that's a significant jump.
But at first, they weren't trying to sell them. They were just trying to insure them. Is that correct?
Exactly. Just trying to insure them and ostensibly to move them from London to Russia back in 1999. But Julian stepped in and said, no, these things are stolen. They need to go back to the victim. Sorry if I make that clear, that these things can't go to Russia. They've got to go back to Mr. Backman in Massachusetts. They're trying to negotiate a way that this can occur. Through this intermediary, this Tony Westbrook, it is put forward that the unsub had nothing to do with the theft, and he doesn't have any criminal culpability for the theft, which occurred back in 1978. But they're kind of at the sticking point with that niggling $15 million price tag for the paintings. And so they actually work out a deal, which seems kind of outrageous, but the unsub is willing to give Mr. Backman the Cezanne, the most valuable piece, in return for clear title to the other 6 pieces. When you think about a contract that's signed under duress, that really would be the very definition of that. You can't offer one piece of stolen property back to let me keep the others. But it seems to be the only way that they're going to be able to move forward with this at the time. It's interesting to note that back in 1999, Mr. Backman did come to the FBI with this, came to the Boston office and kind of related where they were in the conversation and where they were in the deal. And the FBI at the time, we were offered to get involved and to perhaps do some kind of undercover operation, some kind of sting to get these paintings back. But ultimately, Mr. Backman decided against it. He didn't want the FBI's assistance. He decided to go do the deal with our unsub. One of the stipulations that Julian Radcliffe put into this deal was that at the time of the transaction, the identity of the unsub would be made known, in that his name would be put in a sealed envelope that would be turned over and be safeguarded and maintained by a third-party law firm. That's how it went down. And that's what all parties agreed to. And again, the FBI, we offered our assistance and they didn't take us up on it.
I just want to be clear why they did that. Were they afraid that the whole deal would just fall apart and they'd see none of the paintings, and so one was better than nothing?
Yeah, I mean, I can't get into Mr. Backman's mindset, but I think anecdotally that was the concern. The paintings have been missing by this point for 21 years. And the fear was that if law enforcement got involved, if we weren't successful, or even if we were successful in identifying who this unsub was and we weren't able to effect a recovery, that the paintings would go missing for another 20 years. I understand Mr. Backman's mindset. I certainly would have advised him against it, as my predecessor was, who worked this case back in 1999. But that was the way he wanted to go with it. So they ended up going forward with a deal. And in October of 99, this deal is transacted in Geneva. They're conducted at the law offices of an attorney over there, a guy named Bernard Fisher, who represented the unsub. And so Julian Radcliffe from the Art Loss Register went there. A couple of experts in Impressionist art from Sotheby's attended as well. And this was going to be the big time when they turn over the Cezanne, and Mr. Backman signs away all rights to the other 6 pieces. And Julian Radcliffe from the ALR, from the Art Loss Register, is going to act as his agent in that. So they review the paperwork in this conference room in Geneva. It's very simple. It's very straightforward. In return for the Cezanne, there's an attachment A, listing the other 6 pieces that were taken in the theft, and he's waiving all ownership rights to it. This is honestly like something out of some spy novel. But after the paperwork is signed, the unsub's attorney makes a phone call on his cell phone. He tells everybody to wait there, and he leaves. And Julian Radcliffe sneaks out behind him and follows him down onto the street. And Julian sees this attorney standing on the street corner. And all of a sudden, this car pulls up to the curb. The back window rolls down. Somebody in the back hands out a garbage bag to the attorney, who clutches it and heads back off to the conference room. If somebody offers to sell you a Cezanne and pulls up in a car and hands it out the window in a garbage bag, I'd be a little circumspect. But that's how it went down. He went back into the offices and they sat down and they opened that garbage bag, and sure enough, there was the Cezanne. Sotheby's experts authenticate it. It's the real deal. And Mr. Backman, that's how he came to get back his piece. It was shipped back to the US. At the time when that deal was transacted, after the Cezanne was handed over, a sealed envelope was provided, and it went into a third party of some law firm that held onto it and kept the identity of the unsub secret. But it was apparently written down in this envelope. It was a bittersweet moment for Mr. Backman because he did get back his Cezanne. He lost his other 6 pieces. He got back his Cezanne, but he had to sell it because there were 10% fee for the Art Loss Register for the work that they did in getting it back. And frankly, from Mr. Backman's point of view, it was just too valuable for him to be holding on to it. Like, he realized he just didn't have the means to be able to hold on to a piece that valuable. And so December of 1999, Sotheby's sold it for $29 million.
Not too shabby.
Yeah, not too shabby. You know, it's funny, Jerry, when we talk in the art world about dollars and how many paintings I've recovered and the value of all the artwork I've recovered more than $100 million in stolen art throughout my career. I hate to throw that out there because it sounds kind of crass, but of course we have to keep track of these things. A, we're the FBI, we keep track of everything, but B, it's important because the federal statutes that we use when we're investigating art theft matters, they have a monetary threshold. So you need to know legally, when you're going to go into court, when you're going to file charges on somebody, you need to know how much that piece of artwork is worth. When we talk about Mr. Backman getting back his painting, he made a tremendous amount of money off of it when it was sold at Sotheby's. You know, he really loved the piece. And, you know, you could say, like, oh, boo-hoo, first world problems. But it was a piece that had been in his family for quite some time, and he was very sorry to see it go. But the end result is, by the end of the last millennium, Mr. Backman got his piece back and then sold it and was made whole. This is like a good time to very quickly talk about a couple of the statutes that our crime team deals with when we're talking about investigating cases, because it's going to show 2 of the biggest things. And the reason why the FBI would have been investigating this back in 1999, there's 2 federal statutes that are kind of the bread and butter for the art crime team and for a lot of FBI agents, regardless of the violation. And it's possession of stolen property and interstate transportation of stolen property. Very simply, possession of stolen property is if you knowingly possess stolen property valued at $5,000 or more. Remember, we just talked about there, you have to have a dollar value that's crossed state lines or a U.S. boundary. And it's important to knowing that it's been stolen. And then the other one is interstate transportation of stolen property, which is pretty similar. It's stolen property valued at $5,000 or more. And knowing that it's been stolen, you take it across state lines or international boundaries. So these are 2 big statutes that we use. What's really important for this is to know that while interstate transportation of stolen property, what we call ITSP, has a 5-year statute, there's no statute of limitations for possession of stolen property. You can never get clear title to stolen property. I can't go and steal your television set out of your house and then keep it in my house for 5 years and then 5 years and a day later go put it up on eBay. You never have clear title to stolen property. And that 5-year statute for transportation of stolen property comes into play here because the deal was done at the end of 1999. And then coincidentally enough, January of 2005, which is just after the 5-year statute of limitations had expired, a Massachusetts businessman, a guy in Boston, reaches out to Sotheby's in the United Kingdom, and he offers to sell for auction the pieces that were stolen from the Backman estate, the remaining 6 pieces.
What a coincidence.
What a coincidence. Like literally, we're talking like 5 years and a month. A guy named Paul Palangian went to Geneva. He took the artwork and he stored it in a Swiss vault at a bank over there called Saracen Bank, and he wants to auction it. So in the spring of 2005, Sotheby's wants 4 of those pieces for their auction. 2 of the Soutines, the Vilmink, and the Utrillo. So they want 4 out of the 6.
But it's still registered as stolen property, right?
What a wonderful segue. I couldn't thank you so much for that. Exactly. Sotheby's in the spring of 2005 does what they always do when they're going to put art in an auction. They reach out to the art loss register and they ask them, is this art stolen? So this presents whichever person at the art loss register got the call. They obviously, maybe there was like a post-it or something because they immediately went to Julian Radcliffe, who runs the art loss register. They asked like, hey, I think you should probably handle this one. So Julian has this conundrum, like, what is he going to do? Because if he says what he's supposed to say as the due diligence for Sotheby's, and he tells them, yes, it's stolen, that artwork is going to disappear. He's going to have to lie to them. Julian was interviewed in the New York Times a few years ago about this very case. And it's interesting. He says it better than I could, trying to speak for him, that he has this dilemma, like, what's he going to do? He has a responsibility to his client, to Sotheby's, but at the same time, he has maybe an overarching ethical, moral obligation to try and get this stolen artwork back. In the end, he decides to lie. He tells them that it's clear, it's okay to put it in the auction. By doing this, it triggers Sotheby's shipping that art from Geneva to London, which is where Julian wants it, because as soon as he gets confirmation that those 4 pieces are now on UK soil, he files a suit to have them seized. He posits before the court that that artwork was part of a deal that was done under duress, and no contract that's under duress can be valid. Therefore, the paintings need to be seized. The High Court in London agrees. They're using a very basic legal principle, the same one that we have here in the US, which is you can never have title to stolen property. That's a truth here. Some countries you can. Some countries, if it goes through 2 or 3 buyers, there's a number of buyers, you can then have clear title. But in the UK, as in the US, you can never have clear title to stolen property. So they seize it. And the judge in the United Kingdom demands to know the identity of our unsub. So that envelope in January of 2006 in court is opened. And obviously, based on what we're talking about today, it's no surprise it's going to be Robert Mardirosian, who was the defense attorney for our thief, David Colvin.
Who tried to play the long game, and it's not coming through for him.
Yeah, I mean, wow, Jerry, I mean, talk about so much work, so much effort. And at the end of the day, 4 out of the 6 pieces are seized in the UK. And one of them has already gone back to Mr. Backman. So the judge in the UK orders Mardirosian to pay $3 million. That's kind of where the case stood in January of 2006.
Go back a little bit so we can get an understanding. So is that a civil judgment?
Yes, in the UK. Mr. Mardirosian's legal problems are now compounding.
And again, that was a civil judgment because he had attempted to sell stolen property.
Exactly.
Okay.
I should have also mentioned that when Tony Westbrook first went to Julian Radcliffe back in 1999 as the intermediary for our unsub, I should have mentioned that our unsub, while he was anonymous, he was doing business as Erie International, which was a shell corporation, which he'd formed in Panama. That's only important just because it gives you some context as to the lengths that Mr. Mardirosian was going to stay under the radar and to keep his identity a secret, that he was actually setting up Panamanian shell corporations. So now in the spring of 2006, we have Mr. Mardirosian has been identified. He lives in Massachusetts. And that's when Julian Radcliffe from the Art Loss Register first came to me, called me up and wanted to sit down with me and talk about this case. And he came in, we had a meeting. He told me about the previous attempt back in 1999. I looked in the case file from 99. It was obviously, as you can understand, it was pretty sparse because nothing ever went forward with it. Mr. Backman decided to go forward with the deal. I'm looking at the case. It seems like a good case. Certainly, the dollar value is well within the boundaries of what not only is it a federal crime, but something that the U.S. Attorney's Office, which is the federal prosecutor for us, would be interested in prosecuting. And it would be possession of stolen property and the ITSP, the Interstate Transportation of Stolen Property. I started doing an investigation. I opened a new case. The records that Julian provided me were very compelling. That shows that it was more than minimal planning in this case, setting up shell corporations and using intermediaries. And the fact that 5 years had passed, the ITSP, to me showed knowledge that what Mardirosian was doing, he knew it was illegal. And that's getting back to one of the elements of these offenses, which is so important and sometimes so hard to prove, is the knowledge. There's specific intent crimes, meaning he has to know that what he's doing is illegal. He has to know that that property is stolen. And it makes sense, right? When you're thinking about it, I mean, if I went to an art gallery and I bought a piece of art from a gallery and paid for it and got a receipt and did everything right, and then turns out that it had been stolen, well, it wouldn't be fair if the FBI came to my house the next day and locked me up for possession of stolen property. It's only a crime if I know that what I'm doing is wrong, if I know that I've got stolen property.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Right. And it's tough. I mean, we don't have it in bank robbery. I mean, you don't have to prove somebody's intent that they knew it was a bank if they go in and rob it or they knew it was FDIC insured.
I guess also you're thinking somebody knocks on your back door and they've got this big screen TV that they want to sell you for $50. They don't have to tell you they stole it for you to have an idea that it's stolen.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why these cases, sometimes they're hard to prove because of that, because it's hard to get into somebody's head and know that they knew it was stolen, right? And be able to show that in court. Most ways, the way we do it is going to be through kind of the peripheral, like it's almost like a circumstantial case. And you would list out the things that Mr. Mardirosian did, which would give credence to the theory that he knew it was stolen. He didn't take these paintings and say, hey, I got these from my client who told me it was his grandmother's paintings and he wanted to give it to me as payment for legal services. That would be a pretty good defense. You know, you could say that like, well, that makes sense. It was kind of bartering with artwork for legal services. But the fact that we didn't know about this nefarious meeting that took place back in 2006, I didn't know about the meeting that Colvin had with his attorney. And the fact that he held on to it and had intermediaries working for him, I think it pushes it over the line. I think it shows that he's aware that it's stolen. And of course, the biggest way that we want to be able to obtain knowledge is to go talk to Mr. Mardirosian. That was early on after I'd conducted my preliminary investigation and kind of had an idea of what I'm talking about. I went out to see him, but he refused to talk and instead referred me to his attorney. I go to the U.S. Attorney's Office with what I have, which I think is a pretty good case at this point. The Assistant U.S. Attorney, or AUSA, who's assigned to it is John Mitchell. John was an outstanding attorney. He's now currently the mayor of New Bedford, Massachusetts. For anybody who's read Moby Dick, it's where Moby Dick starts. It's a beautiful whaling city down on southeastern Massachusetts. John is an outstanding prosecutor. We're going through this back and forth, and we're trying to figure out, do we have enough to charge him? Yes. Do we have enough to convict him? And it's kind of a little nebulous at this point. John wants more, as every federal prosecutor wants more. And we're always like, you have enough. And, yeah, but I get it, of course, because it's very cavalier for the FBI agents to say, hey, charge it. But of course, the AUSA is the one who's going to have to stand up in court and argue it. So we're kind of at an impasse at this point. I was an agent for 28 plus years, and this was one of the craziest things that ever happened in my career was on this case. It was February 1st of 2006, and I'm driving into work in the morning. I don't know if you can call it driving on the Southeast Expressway in Boston, but I'm actually sitting behind the wheel, not moving, but I'm sitting there and I'm listening to NPR.
Plenty of time to think.
Plenty of time. Plenty of time to think and listen to the radio. I'm listening to NPR. Morning Edition comes on with Bob Oakes. I have no idea that this is happening. And Bob Oakes tells the listeners that his guest is going to be a guy named Robert Mardirosian, who's going to talk about some stolen artwork.
What? Are you serious? You had no idea.
I had no idea. Nobody had any idea. I was like, am I hearing? I know it's early. It's like 6:30 in the morning. I know I'm tired, but I'm like, am I literally hearing things?
This is the person that didn't want to talk to the FBI, but he's willing to go on national public radio to talk to a journalist about this.
Yeah, on live radio about the stolen artwork. And I'm sitting there listening to this, and it was absolutely shocking. I never really figured out what his motivation was. Again, I assume it was because things were heating up because the FBI had tried to talk to him, that I guess maybe he thought like the best defense is a good offense, that he's going to try and get in front of this thing and maybe garner some public sympathy. I don't know what his mindset was.
But at this point, you have no idea how he got a hold of the artwork. You don't know anything about the backstory.
Right, exactly. And now he fills in all the blanks in my complaint affidavit that I needed to charge him. I mean, it was like all the highlighted sections of like what we need to have put together a conviction. He gave those to me. And he tells America that he knew these paintings were stolen. He tells his listeners that David Colvin committed the heist. David Colvin was a client of his, and he showed up one night at his place in Watertown. He said that sometime after Colvin left and after he was murdered, Mardirosian went up into his attic and found this garbage bag and opened it up, and it was filled with the stolen Backman paintings. And he's telling Bob Oakes, and therefore he's telling me and everyone else who's listening, that he thought about returning it, but there was no reward. So he held on to it because he was still trying to figure out how he could monetize the stolen property. This is an officer of the court. And he's telling this on live radio. It was just absolutely bizarre. So, of course, while I'm listening to this, I'm getting interrupted because my phone keeps blowing up with all my coworkers who know about this case that are calling me up to say, like, are you listening to NPR right now? And yeah, of course I was.
This is amazing. I've got this smile on my face like, what?
Can you imagine, Jerry? You're like working this case, you're trying to interview your subject, and he's refusing to talk to you. And then you flip on the radio and he's giving a full confession over live radio. I mean, it was just bizarre.
Bizarre. I love crime fiction, and you're talking about a major twist in the story that you would never see coming.
It was such a twist. And I'm telling you, had it not been for this NPR interview, I don't know what would have happened. I can't say we would not have charged him or we would have charged him. I'm just saying that at this point, we were really kind of at an impasse because we really needed something more. We needed something to prove the knowledge. What's also interesting about Mr. Mardirosian's foibles is he was a state defense attorney. He should probably have limited himself to state crimes because apparently he didn't know that the statute of limitations for possession of stolen property never expires. So he waited like 5 years and a month before trying to sell those other pieces because he assumed that the statute of limitations on the interstate transportation had expired, which it had, but not on possession. So we still had a viable charge against him.
Are you an attorney?
I am not.
I'm not either. So I'm trying to get an understanding of why everything else expires except for the possession charge. And I assume that is so that somebody has a remedy of getting back stolen property no matter how long.
Yeah, I mean, I'll answer that with an analogy that John Mitchell, the AUSA, would use in court in a couple of years from this point. And it was a great analogy where he said, imagine somebody steals your car and they keep it in their garage for 5 years. And then a day later, they take it to the Department of Motor Vehicles to register it. You can't put a timer on it because when you think about it, it's not going to have a deterrent effect on possession of stolen property because I'll just hold on to it for 5 years and then it's mine. That's why the statute, at least as I interpret it, never expires.
I don't understand why so many statutes do expire. That's another thing for another day.
Yeah, that would be for an attorney. I don't claim to be one. So it really opened up the case at this point. John Mitchell and I had a meeting at the U.S. Attorney's Office shortly thereafter with Mardirosian's attorneys, one of whom is Jean Kempthorne, who's a former AUSA that I worked with when she was an AUSA. Great attorney, great litigator. We kind of hoped that by Mardirosian having a former AUSA as his attorney, federal prosecutor, she would get it and we could hopefully figure out a nice conclusion to this case. John Mitchell wants this thing we can wrap this up quickly. Maybe Mr. Mardirosian pleads out to an information, which is kind of the more informal way of wrapping up a case prior to indictment. But Mr. Mardirosian's attorneys are kind of strident and they're like, no, we don't think you have a case. I remember sitting there and John and I were kind of a little baffled by this because we're like, did you not hear the NPR interview? Like, are we missing something here? But they were pretty confident that he had done nothing wrong and we didn't have a case and there's really nothing that we could do about it. And so this meeting kind of went nowhere. The conclusion of the meeting, John asked for Mardirosian's passport because he has a place in the south of France. It's interesting, maybe here's another little aside on this case, and there's many of them, but Mr. Mardirosian was also an artist, and he actually quit his law practice, I think in like 1989 or so, to become a full-time artist. And he went under the name Romard, which was kind of a portmanteau of Robert Mardirosian. And he was a tremendous artist. He was actually very talented. He used to like to paint in the south of France because he had this dual residency, not dual citizenship, but he had a house in the south of France. John asked for his passport and they said, oh yeah, we'll get it to you. We'll get it to you. Well, we don't get it. And after calling for a week, John finally says, look, this is crazy. Just let's go lock him up, which is when I find out that 2 days after the meeting with his attorneys, Mr. Mardirosian jumped on a plane to France. He was now hiding out in France.
An innocent man who has nothing to fear just decides to go to France.
Yeah, like we said earlier, like this is a marathon, not a sprint. He stayed there for 9 months. 9 months he was in France, just took off. I'm starting the process to try and get him extradited. It's a lengthy process and it's going on and on. And we get one in our corner. We get a break and his passport is set to expire. So he goes to the U.S. consulate down somewhere in the south of France to try and get a new passport, claiming that his current passport was destroyed or he lost it or something like that. I guess he was thinking that like the State Department wouldn't check to see what the deal is with this guy. And of course, he's got an outstanding warrant issued by the FBI in Boston. So they're not going to give him a new passport. And so with no options left for Mr. Mardirosian, he has to come back to the U.S. We have since charged him with possession of stolen property, and there's a warrant in place. So when he lands at Logan Airport, we arrest him right there at Logan Airport as he's clearing customs and process him.
Do you get the honor of being able to do that?
No, unfortunately, I was out of the country on another case at the time. So my squad mates got the honor of doing that. Frustrating, but that's sometimes the way it works out. But there's another little curveball in this case is a week before Mardirosian is coming home, I'm talking to John Mitchell, the AUSA, and he says, hey, you know what? It's probably a good idea. We should probably do a search warrant on his house, see if there's anything there, records, computers, emails, receipts, anything, the typical stuff that you're looking for in any type of art theft case, white collar investigation, whatever. So I put together a very quick little affidavit to execute a search warrant at his house. He lives down on Cape Cod in a nice gated community.
Before you move on, I need to make sure we all remember that there are still 2 pieces that are missing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
There are. Yep. We've got 2 pieces that are still out in the wind right now. Yeah, it's a good point, Jerry. Yeah, so we're going to execute the search warrant down on the Cape. If you watch like the FBI shows and you look at like the SWAT team coming up and like taking the door off the hinges and moving through and clearing and everything, like that was not this search because Mr. Mardirosian is in France. And I've got some information that he has a son named Mark who may be there, may not be there. This is like as low a key search warrant as you can get. So I go down there just by myself. I go to the local PD, the Falmouth Police Department. There's some detectives I'm friends with there, grab a few local detectives, and we head over to the house. They know the code to get into this gated community because it's in their patrol area. We pull up there in the morning, and I go up, knock on the door, and as I thought might be the case, may be the case, nobody answers. We had a contingency plan worked out because I don't want to just take this guy's door in.
Wait, I know what you do. You go to the ceramic frog on the front step and you lift it up for the spare key.
My goodness, yes. Unfortunately, exactly, Jerry. There's no ceramic frogs or anything of that nature around there, so we don't have any way to get in. But what we do have is I had it planned with John Mitchell, so I called him up, said, "Yeah, we're here." Nobody answered, so he calls Mardirosian's attorney to say, "Hey, reach out to Mardirosian's son, who either spends his time there in the house or he's somewhere around Falmouth, to see if he can come over and let us in because we don't want to have to kick the door in." That's fine. John calls me back a few minutes later. It's just sitting there in my Buick car, just talking and drinking coffee. And John calls me back and says, yeah, his attorney just called. The son is like 10 minutes away and doesn't want to come over. So go ahead and do what you have to do. And I'm like, well, that's strange. Most people would rather make a 10-minute drive and not have their front door kicked in.
Uh-oh, I feel another twist coming on.
Yeah. So I'm like, okay, we go up to the door and I have a ram. But again, I'm so loath to like just smash this door in. Nobody wants to do it. But as maybe your listeners may or may not know, like when we do that to a door, we have the obligation now to secure it. You can't just leave a door open like that. And we're going to have to get a locksmith to come in or board the door up. When I was on the violent crime squad for many years, we used to have a bag which had like a drill and a padlock and a hasp. So if we did have to take a door in, we would just drill that hasp onto the door, put a padlock on it with a Post-it, tell them that they can go to the local police department to get the keys, but can't leave the door unsecured. So rather than take the door in, there's like a little side light window and I'm able to pop out the window and reach in and unlock the door. So we go into this house and still have to clear it. It seems empty, but just have to make sure it's empty. And I go down the stairs to the basement. I'm just like overwhelmed by the smell of marijuana. And on the ping pong table, there's 50 pounds of marijuana and all the packaging materials and scales that allegedly belong to Mardirosian's son, Mark. There's also a couple of shotguns unsecured under the bed, some cocaine. That was the reason why Mardirosian's son didn't want to come let us in, is because he was allegedly running a lucrative marijuana distribution business out of his house or his dad's house. So he took off and he actually ended up being a fugitive for a couple of weeks before the Falmouth police eventually tracked him down and arrested him. So no, we didn't find anything to further the art theft matter other than the 50 pounds of weed.
Yeah, you would have thought his father would have given him a heads up.
Well, his dad didn't know. I mean, his dad didn't know we were going to do the search. And that's why we intentionally waited until we were at the front door before John called his attorney to tell him that we were there. As I said, Mardirosian came back about a week later. We arrested him and it ended up going to trial in August of 2008. We charged him with the possession of stolen property. John had originally charged him with the interstate transportation of stolen property as well, but that was thrown out by the judge. There is a 5-year statute on that. And John had argued that the transfer of the paintings from Geneva to London would have counted as part of that crossing international boundaries.
And restarted the clock.
Yeah, but the judge ruled that no, one of those international boundaries would have had to have been U.S. territory. So we didn't get that in, but that was fine. We go to trial in August of 2008, charging him with the possession of stolen property. Worth millions. It's a significant amount of money. There's so many times when these cases go to trial and you're like, well, what is the defense thinking? But they had a good defense. We certainly didn't agree with it, but he had a good defense. He had 2 points to his defense, and it was kind of an interesting legal argument because we had to prove that he knew these paintings were stolen. His defense was twofold. One, he argued that 1999 agreement with the victim, Mr. Backman, gave him clear title so that the paintings were now legal. The follow-up to that argument was to say, look, even if you disagree with that, even if you say that that deal was under duress and it was void, fine. But Mr. Mardirosian still believed that he held clear title. Thus, he doesn't have the knowledge that they're stolen because in his mind, he thinks he's got clear title. It was an interesting argument.
But that doesn't erase the fact that he thought they were stolen before he got the clear title.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I'm just telling you what they came in with. I mean, I see what they're trying to do, but obviously I agree with you, Jerry. It's kind of a specious argument because no, they're stolen paintings and you knew they were stolen. And exactly, you're right. Going to lengths to try and make illicit property licit doesn't cut it. John Mitchell was one of the AUSAs and the other AUSA was Ryan DeSantis, who's another outstanding prosecutor. Ryan had the job of the direct examination of Mr. Backman. He did a masterful job. Because the defense, as you can imagine, tried to portray Mr. Backman as this filthy rich, out of touch millionaire with his Cezanne, and you shouldn't have any sympathy for the guy that he got his multi-million-dollar art collection pilfered. But Ryan did a great job and really portrayed Mr. Backman the way he should have been portrayed, as a very sympathetic victim. He didn't come across as arrogant or haughty or anything like that. He came across as a very sincere older gentleman. Even though he came from a tremendous amount of wealth, he started off in the food service business as a busboy and a waiter and eventually opened his own hotel and restaurant out in Stockbridge, Massachusetts. He really came across as very sympathetic and he appeared to be very well liked by the jury. And then John Mitchell had the job of doing the direct examination of Julian Radcliffe from the Art Loss Register. And again, the defense tried to portray him as some greedy businessman who came in to take advantage of Mr. Backman and take advantage of the situation. And again, the jury didn't buy it. Julian did a great job in this case, very skilled negotiator, and he was able to ultimately be the impetus that got these paintings recovered. The jury didn't buy the defense's portrayal of Julian either. 6-day trial on August 18th of 2008, they came back with the conviction. 3 months later, Mardirosian came back to court for sentencing. Judge Mark Wolf was the presiding judge. He had no sympathy for Mr. Mardirosian. I think Mr. Mardirosian incurred the wrath of the court because of the fact that he was an officer of the court. He was a defense attorney, a member of the bar, and he should have known better. He got 8 years in prison.
Oh, wow.
And in a very unusual move that we typically don't see in these types of cases, the judge ordered him held immediately pending appeal because of the fact that he fled to France and then tried to pull that issue with his passport and trying to get a new passport and lying about the reasoning behind it. The judge wanted nothing to do with that. He ended up getting held. Mr. Mardirosian appealed it, of course, on several grounds. One of the terms that he took offense to was that the government called what he did basically ransoming the artwork. And they said it was unfair and prejudicial. So in 2010, the U.S. First Circuit Court affirmed the conviction and the sentence. And they basically said, and I'm going to just quote it here, while the term ransom is highly provocative, it accurately describes the agreement from 1999. The government did not improperly use the term. The problems didn't stop then. In April of 2014, Mardirosian lost a civil trial and had to pay Backman another $3 million in damages. So, yeah, when you think about the options that Mr. Mardirosian had at his disposal on what to do with that artwork, probably $25,000 cash back in 1978 to do the right thing and turn them over to Mr. Backman was probably a nice way to do it.
Did he have money to pay that $3 million fine?
I don't know the answer to that, Jerry. I don't know if that fine was ever paid. You know, obviously, from my standpoint, the criminal matter resolved and I moved on, but I don't know. I mean, I would be surprised, to be honest with you. That's a significant amount of money. And he was a defense attorney and a talented artist, but I don't know if he had millions at his disposal.
Maybe he had to sell that house in the south of France. He wasn't going to be using it for at least 8 years. But we haven't really resolved this because what about those 2 missing pieces? Did you ever recover those?
We did.
Oh, good.
That's the nice little finality to this story. In November of 2010, one of my coworkers, John Walker, who worked at Legat Bern, our legal attaché office in Switzerland, down in his workshop, he made a bespoke wooden case because after I gave him the measurements for the 2 pieces, and he went to the bank vault in Geneva and took custody of the last 2 pieces, and he put them in this perfectly crafted case, and he hand carried it on the plane all the way back to Boston and gave it back to me, and I, in turn, gave it to Mr. Backman. So, yeah, Mr. Backman finally got the last 2 pieces from his collection exactly 32 years after they were stolen.
Wow, what a story, because I imagine that usually when, as you were saying at the beginning, when it takes this long, the story doesn't have this kind of happy ending.
No, yeah. And I guess finally, even maybe the final thought of this is the Cezanne in May of 2019. Christie's sold Pitcher and Fruit by Cezanne for $59 million. That was the last hammer price for that piece.
And just think about it. If it had never been stolen, it could have been passed down in the family, and somebody would have had in their dining room next to the china cabinet a $59 million painting that many of the relatives had no idea what it was worth.
Yeah, it's amazing. Patience is a virtue when you're working art theft matters because time for some stolen things, as time goes on, the chance of a recovery drops significantly. But in art, these things seem to surface and you just have to be patient about it. And even with this case, first came to the FBI in 99, then it disappeared for another 7 years. I took over the case or started basically a new case on it. Even then I had to wait for 9 months while Mr. Mardirosian was in the south of France. They're not quick hits. I would have to learn throughout my career. I worked violent crime for the majority of my career, for about 24 years of my career, and worked violent crime. And I did like the more fast-paced nature of bank robberies and cases like that where it wraps up very quickly. But I really enjoyed kind of the circumspect nature of art theft investigations where you really have time to plot your next move, like a game of chess.
And that is a good segue for us to explain more about the art crime team. So it sounds like you were assigned to a violent crime squad in Boston, and the art crime team was more of a collateral duty when cases came up.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, we have about 24, 25 agents nationwide, and some of the larger offices like Philly, Miami, New York, Chicago, LA, the agents are full time because there's so much work. And not that we didn't have enough work as well, but it was a collateral duty. For me, my dream going into the FBI was I wanted to work bank robberies. I thought that was like the coolest thing. My first 5 years in the FBI, I was on a white collar crime squad. I enjoyed it very much. Wasn't exciting as much as working violent crime, but it was certainly really interesting.
Yeah, don't talk bad about white collar crime because I worked economic crime my entire career. So be careful what you say.
No, it's all good things. And I used to say that. It's fascinating to work these types of cases. And Jerry, you'll appreciate this like way back in the day. Now, when wire transfers, somebody's wiring money through 30 or 40 accounts in a minute. But back in the day, working these white collar crime cases, it was so exciting when you'd get the check and you'd turn it over and see where it was cashed. And then you'd get a subpoena for that bank. And then you'd get the copies of the checks and you'd find where the money went. By today's standards, of course, that was like archaic, but back then it was really exciting. It was interesting to work these types of cases. But I always wanted to work violent crime. And so we had the violent crime squad, Squad C6 in Boston. And whenever there was a bank robbery, they would put an overhead page to tell somebody from C6 to take a call. And you knew that was for a bank robbery. And I would always just go scurrying down to the C6, to the VCMO squad to see if they needed help. You did that long enough and helped out on enough search warrants and surveillances. And so when there was finally an opening on the squad, I put in for it and got it because at least they knew me. Maybe I wasn't the best person for the job, but at least they knew who I was. But I had that case. I mean, I was on that squad for about a year, and then I inherited the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum case, which was a big art theft from a museum up in Boston that occurred back in 1990.
Yeah, I'm sure that a lot of people that know you and know that you were the case agent for the Gardner case were wondering why I had you review this case instead of that. And for me, it's because I know so much about the case, but we will have you come back and talk about the Gardner case because I'm sure you could talk about that without any notes. Let's give everyone just a short paragraph understanding of the Gardner Museum theft in case they don't know what we're talking about.
Sure, of course. Yeah. So in March of 1990, two subjects posing as police officers knocked on the door of this museum in Boston, the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum. They claimed they were responding to a call of a disturbance, and the night guard, against protocol, let them in. And once they were in, they tied up the two guards on duty and spent the next 81 minutes going through the museum, removing 13 works of art off the walls. And the value, again, rearing its ugly head of putting a value on things. But it's probably well over $1 billion when you're thinking about the value of everything that was lost. So it's the world's most valuable property crime case, not just art theft or museum theft. But yeah, no, it's a fascinating case. And I worked that case right up until the day I retired, April 30th, when it was reassigned. But when I got this case back in 2002, and I'd been on the VCMO squad, the Violent Crime Major Offender Squad, for a year, primarily working bank robberies and kidnappings and fugitives. I was the new guy on the squad and nobody wanted it, which I was like, I couldn't believe that nobody wanted this case. Like I remember I graduated in 89 and I was working in New York City at the time of the heist in March of 1990. And by coincidence, I was at the Museum of Natural History in New York City when I heard these two women next to me. I overheard them talking about some big museum theft, and the guys had dressed up like police officers. And I was fascinated by that. And I really was at a museum. I wasn't like at a strip club or something, and I'm just trying to make it sound like I'm more esoteric or something. And I was at a museum. No, I was at a museum, but I remember like just being fascinated listening to this. You hear the word heist, it like catches your attention. And then 12 years later, I got assigned to the case. It was a fascinating case and frustrating because by this point, it was 12 years old. And this predated computerized file systems, case files. It was the old paper jacket. When you'd start at the very bottom page was the very first serial, and you'd work your way up. And after 12 years, that case had filing cabinets filled. So it took months just to like wrap my head around it. But I was hooked. I was really hooked at the idea of working these mysteries. And then in 2004, they canvassed for the art crime team. this new team that was forming. The Gardner Museum robbery had been on the VCMO squad, the violent crime squad, because it was major theft, and that's just the way the Bureau categorized where these types of cases would come. And then, of course, once we had a national team, you had agents in the various field offices who could actually work each particular case, regardless of what squad they may be on. It's really worked well because you get agents from really diverse backgrounds. Our crime team, we have archaeologists and PhD candidates and people who can speak and read ancient languages. I mean, really fascinating, very smart people on this team. It's had a tremendous amount of success. It was well overdue for the FBI to have such a team because when you look at other national law enforcement agencies around the world, like the Carabinieri, the Italian police, they have the TPC, which is their art crime team. I think they have something like 250 officers on this team. Just really an incredible unit that they have full-time deployed around the country. Really, we started off with just a handful of agents, and over the last 20 years, it's really grown into a really, really sophisticated and qualified team. I was sorry to leave that in the same way that I was sorry to leave the FBI because, of course, I had my mandatory retirement. It's impressive the amount of work that the team does and continues to do every day.
What kind of training or certifications? Because I take it that's the difference between any other agent who works property crime cases. The difference is the members of the team have had additional training and experiences. So talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, certainly there's nothing that art crime team agents do that's different than agents who are investigating any other type of violation. I mean, you work a logical investigation from A to Z, but there's kind of nuances, I would say, about working art theft matters that require just a little bit specialized knowledge. We would train annually. We would train with our foreign partners. We would get training and continue to get ongoing training from the Smithsonian, for example, on proper ways to collect artwork and get it back to the field office in one piece, right? You go and recover a piece of artwork, an artifact that may be 1,000 years old. Like, what do you do with it? Typically, as you know, Jerry, you recover some items, you recover it, and you need to initial and date the item so that you for chain of custody, and so you take a Sharpie and scribble your initials on the bottom of it. Well, we don't do that on 1,000-year-old ancient Sumerian vase. There's different ways that we have to do it that are going to satisfy legal requirements, and it's going to satisfy the Bureau's chain of custody. But at the same time, it's not going to damage the work because you don't want to be that guy who ends up damaging something that managed to survive for 1,000 years and then it gets broken in the trunk of your Buick car, taking it back to the office.
I tell you, that makes me chuckle just the thought of that.
Right. Yeah. So it's an impressive team. It really is. And the cases are fascinating. I love history. I love reading about history. And so for me, it was really a great collateral duty for me to work because it's so intertwined with history, working these cases. And I always enjoy tracing back the piece. I mean, you have to. It's part of an investigation. You want to know where it came from. But that little treasure hunt of trying to track down, like, where did this guy get it from? And where did he get it from? And where was it exhibited? What galleries was it in? When you're looking at a piece of artwork and you're looking at the verso, which is the back of it, and there's stickers and labels from various places where it was exhibited over the last few hundred years. And you put that together, it's part of the investigation. It's part of the package that we would then bring to the U.S. Attorney's Office. It's not just a piece of artwork, it's a piece of our cultural identity. And when you have these little things, these subtle points of history that you can bring together, it makes it really fascinating when you take it to be prosecuted and it gives life to it. It's like this personification that it's not just a dead piece of artwork. It's like a living thing and it has a history and it has a lineage and it has a provenance. And that's our job as we try and recover these items and get them back to their rightful owners.
Well, that brings up two questions. One, going back to our original case review, when it comes to Mardirosian, do we truly believe that he just happened to find this garbage bag of the stolen artwork in his attic? Or was he safekeeping it for his client before his client got killed? Do you have any idea?
I mean, I've got my opinions. And yes, I mean, my opinion, for what that's worth, is that, that Colvin wanted to take these paintings down to Florida. And I think Mardirosian talked him out of it because Mardirosian wanted to maintain control over it. Why would Mardirosian care if he wants to go sell them down in Florida? I think keeping them in the house, I don't believe that Mardirosian just happened to stumble upon them up in his attic. I believe that he told Colvin that he would hold on to them and that the two of them would work together to try and find a buyer for it. And then Mr. Mardirosian came upon the age-old problem of trying to move valuable stolen artwork is it's impossible to find a buyer. That's why they just gathered dust. But yeah, no, I don't believe it. I don't believe that he just happened to find them. I think that was a plan that Colvin, this kind of ne'er-do-well, was not going to be able to find a buyer. And I think Mardirosian probably won him over by saying that he could probably find a buyer for these paintings, or at least somehow arrange the return for a significantly higher reward.
All right, so we've solved the mystery of Mardirosian and his client Colvin, but the Gardner Museum robbery theft has still not been resolved. The paintings are someplace, as you said, gathering dust.
Yeah, no question. I don't know how many times I've been asked over the last 20 plus years, like, oh, will they ever come back? And the question is,
I have a question for you.
go ahead.
Do you think the paintings will ever be recovered?
I can honestly say I've not been asked that yet today. Yes, and they will. And it's not some type of overly optimistic pie in the sky reasoning. They will come back. When you're doing these types of cases, once again, you have to look to history. And it is very, very rare. I never use absolutes because there's always going to be some outlier, but it is extremely rare when artwork is stolen that it's intentionally destroyed, because that's your get out of jail free card. If you end up getting caught, you don't want to destroy it. You may need it at some point. Better to hide it somewhere that at least you can get to it if the FBI comes knocking on your door. So yeah, it will be. And if you look to history, there's no shortage of recoveries of stolen art and artifacts that come back decades, even hundreds of years after they were stolen. So yeah, it's the whole generational thing. And I'm confident that somebody's going to be cleaning out an attic, somebody's going to be moving a piece of furniture, and they're going to come across something.
I could talk to you forever. This is very fascinating for me. But you've just made another segue to the very last case that you worked on before you were forced out the door with mandatory retirement. And that's the return of 22 historic artifacts that were recovered here and returned back to Okinawa, Japan. Tell us about that, because what a great send off for you to be able to have this last case to kind of cap off your time on the FBI's art crime team.
Thanks, Jerry. Yeah, that was a great case. Thank you for that segue, for setting me up with that. These items, 22 artifacts, were looted from Okinawa in the last days of World War II. So you're talking almost 80 years ago. Somebody died. The family's going through the decedent's house, and they came upon these, what appeared to be very old and very valuable Asian artifacts. And wow, did they do the right thing? They contacted me. I did some searching, and it wasn't hard to find that these were stolen. They were actually entered into the FBI art crime team's stolen art database. It's called the National Stolen Art File. They were entered in 2000 at the request, basically, of President Clinton at the time. There was a big summit, and the Okinawan government brought this up, like, hey, we want these pieces back. And so at the direction of the White House, the FBI entered these stolen articles into the National Stolen Art File. And they sat there for 20 plus years. Sure enough, there they were. One of the many fascinating things about working on the art crime team is when you see these old black and white photographs of these stolen artifacts, photographs that were taken in the 20s. And then all of a sudden you unfurl these very delicate scrolls which depict hand-painted portraits of 19th century Okinawan kings. And now you see them in vibrant color right in front of you when you've just been looking at these old, blurry black and white photos. It's really fascinating. These artifacts, I packaged them up very carefully, and I personally drove them down to the Smithsonian down in DC, and we turned them over to the Smithsonian. That's another thing when you talk about some of the differences between standard FBI investigations and art crime team investigations, because when you're talking with artwork that's this valuable and this delicate and this fragile, you don't want to put it in the FBI's evidence controls. It's certainly secure and safe and everything, but there's humidity levels that have to be considered. And so we actually stored them, and I signed them over to the Smithsonian for safekeeping until they could be shipped back to Okinawa. And they were shipped back with the help of basically the Monuments Men, which is, everybody knows that movie. That's a real unit. And the government brought it back, the 38 Golf unit. And the U.S. Army has that now. And they were wonderful. And they shipped them over on a cargo plane, and NCIS safeguarded them until they were turned over to our legat in Tokyo. And then they were repatriated. And talk about like good timing and bad timing. The repatriation ceremony was my last day in the office. So I could not attend in person as much as I would have loved to have been there in Okinawa to hand them over personally. But they did get officially handed over the last week of my career. So it was a great case. And getting back to what I mentioned earlier about monetary, I mean, I don't know what the monetary value of them is. They're extremely valuable. You can't even put a price tag on this. One of those hand-painted portraits of one of the kings, there were 4 of them. One of the portraits never been seen before. All they had was a photograph of this painting. This is the only known portrait of this king of Okinawa, and something that's very satisfying to be able to bring that back. It matters for everybody. It's not just part of Okinawa's cultural patrimony. It's us as humans. Just play a small role in preserving that for future generations is really very exciting, and I think it's pretty profound.
One of the things that I've done in retirement is to travel a lot. And on that first or second day when we arrive in a foreign city, my husband, who was a history major in college and a high school social studies and history teacher, and I immediately go to the local museum to take in the historical significance of where we are. Which is one of the reasons why this episode, these case reviews that you're presenting here are so fascinating to me. So again, thank you.
Oh, my pleasure, Jerry. I hope it shows. I really enjoy talking about these things. It's been a really rewarding career, not just working the art crime cases, but just working as an FBI agent. Always more than happy to tell old war stories and talk about old cases because I think it's pretty fun to do.
As everyone knows, in the show notes for this episode, I'll have links to additional resources about the art crime team and also news articles and write-ups about all of the cases that we've talked about today.
Oh, that sounds great.
And the photos that you shared with me, I will also include in the show notes so that everybody else can have a chance to look at them.
That sounds great. I hope your listeners enjoy it.
All right, so we are at the very end where you have to answer my standard questions, which I think everyone is also very interested in learning about, and that is when and why you joined the FBI.
Okay. I always wanted to be an FBI agent. I think it was something genetic that it's just ever since I was a little kid. But I did not grow up in a family of law enforcement. My father was an advertising executive and a wonderful artist in his own right. And my mom is a very accomplished musician, piano player and singer. It was kind of preordained that I would go into something creative. So I was a film major in college. I went to Boston University. I was a film major. And after college, I ended up getting a job at Comedy Central. I worked for HBO, which is a co-owner of the Comedy Central network. And I worked on a television show called Short Attention Span Theater with a then unknown comic host named Jon Stewart. We were all in our 20s together and used to hang out. And it was a really fun job. I mean, I was an associate producer. I was working on this show. We were having a great time. But I was like, it's not what I want to do. I wanted to be an FBI agent. At the time, I didn't have my 3 years of full-time work experience so that I could apply to the FBI. But I really wanted to try and make myself a viable candidate because I didn't really have much. I was a film major. I didn't have much going for me. So I left Comedy Central on a Friday, and Monday I reported to the New York City Transit Police Academy, and I was a MTA transit cop for 3 years. That's how I got into the FBI. My parents were surprised, to say the least, when I became a transit cop, but they grew to understand that it was something that I really enjoyed doing. And I think one of the ironic things about working as an investigator is that people don't understand, and maybe it's the biggest thing people don't understand, is just how creative it is. I've found trying to solve mysteries is a really creative process.
I agree with that.
Absolutely. And it's like showing up at a crime scene, like a real whodunit, and just kind of standing there and like taking it all in and looking around and looking for security cameras. It's a really creative process. It's like trying to solve a crossword puzzle, which I love doing the New York Times crossword puzzle every day. It's a very creative process. The whole process of solving a crime and figuring it out, and then how are you going to outsmart the subject? I think it's really something that's just always fascinated me, puzzles and games. And that's kind of how I got into it. No looking back and no regrets.
Wow, that's really fascinating. I love asking this question because I'm often surprised by the answers, but I do have to push back a little bit and make sure that if there is a television producer that's listening, that's a pathway also into the FBI.
Oh, absolutely. There's no question. And that's the funny thing that my first day at Quantico, I was class 96 too. It was such a varied, eclectic mix. There were 50 of us in the class. I don't know how many go through now. Yeah, sure, there were some former cops like myself. There were military officers, but there were salesmen and customer service reps, and there were bankers. And I've stayed in touch with a number of those agents throughout my career. And it's like, wow, some of the people that you would be like, you would not in a million years think that person is an FBI agent, and they end up being great FBI agents. It could be a producer, a television producer, or somebody who sold furniture or worked in a bank, because you just don't know what somebody's hidden talents are. And so many talents that are requisite for being a really good agent are found throughout all facets of business, just good interpersonal skills and
Curiosity.
exactly, Jerry. Curiosity, just wanting to know the answers to things is a great trait to have in an FBI agent.
You retired recently.
Yeah, April 30th.
Have you figured out what you want to do in post FBI? Are you doing it?
Yes, I am. I enjoyed working on the art crime team so much that I was like, how do we do this in the private sector? So some colleagues and I retired in order to start a consulting business that's dedicated to art and cultural property protection.
And what's the name of the business?
Argus Cultural Property Consultants. Argus is a mythological watchdog, and so that's how we came up with our name.
I will put a link to your company's website in the show notes.
Oh, thank you. We're trying to do the same thing in the private sector and protect cultural property and help get it back, and more importantly, try and prevent it from getting stolen, lost, or destroyed in the first place.
Excellent. We're coming to the very end where I love to give my guest the last word. What would you like to say?
It has been a remarkable career. And when I say remarkable, I'm not saying that to sound immodest. I'm just like any agent or professional support who dedicated their life to working for the FBI. It's remarkable. It is important to be doing something that's bigger than yourself. And it's something that I've always taken a tremendous amount of pride in doing. Working for the FBI, especially as a street agent, I never went up through the chain of command because I enjoyed working cases and being out on the street. You get to be a part of history, albeit a very small part. A year in, I was TDY, temporarily assigned down to Atlanta for the 1996 Olympic bombing at Centennial Park, and I worked TDY down there for a few months. Like everybody in the FBI, I worked on 9/11 and the Boston Marathon and all these other cases that came up throughout my career. And it's really humbling to get to be a part of history, small part, but just to do something to shape our future as a country and as a society. I've always really taken a tremendous amount of pride in doing that. Very fortunate that I had the opportunity to do that.
And that's the end of the interview. In your podcast app's description of this episode, you'll find a link to the show notes at jerrywilliams.com, where you'll find a photo of retired agent Geoffrey Kelly and links to articles about the case of the stolen and recovered artwork. There are also links to more information about the FBI's elite art crime team and more FBI retired case file review episodes about property crime thefts and the recovery of rare documents and books. I hope you enjoyed the interview and that you'll share it with your friends, family, and associates. You can show me just how much you liked it by buying me a coffee. There's a link in your podcast app's description of this episode, or you can visit jerrywilliams.com and tap on the little coffee cup icon in the bottom right-hand corner of my website. Don't forget to follow FBI Retired Case File Review on your favorite podcast app. Now, this podcast is all about true crime, but if you're also interested in crime fiction, once a month via my reader team email, I keep you up to date on the FBI and books, TV, and movies. When you join my reader team, you get access to my FBI reading resource, a colorful list of more than 70 books about the FBI written by FBI agents who have been guests on this podcast. There's nonfiction, crime fiction, true crime, and memoirs. You'll also get my FBI reality checklist, where I debunk 20 cliches about the FBI and receive news about what I'm up to and about my FBI nonfiction and crime fiction books. I want to thank you for listening to the very end. I hope you come back for another episode of FBI Retired Case File Review with Jerry Williams. Thank you.